this is going to be a sort of hopefully interactive. So if anybody wants to interject or ask for clarity or whatever, I'd be delighted if you do so. But this starting off slide shows some of the things, spiritual influences and things that grabbed my attention during a misspent life. So you've got people like William Penn, the caddies at Findhorn, Buddhism, Gurdjieff, the old rogue, Dalai Lama, Walt Whitman, and so on and so forth. And there's no way that we'd be wandering into all those different parties. But I want to start off with my earliest memories. I was born in London in 1944, April the 14th, 1944, 44. Very easy to remember. Lots of fours in it, so for Asian people, not very auspicious, but I'm still here. So one of my earliest memories was we lived in London, and we lived near to my grandma and grandpa's place, my mum's parents. And
whereabouts in London?
This was in Southgate, in North London. And I had in the bedroom that I stayed at in my grandparents' house, there was on the wall a framed copy of this quotation, which is, I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown. And he replied, go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way. And it came from a speech that this guy, George VI, gave in 1941, just after the time of the Battle of Britain. And that was on the wall, and every time I went to my grandma and grandpa's house, I saw that, and it sort of stuck in my memory, as things do when you're young and impressionable. My grandparents, well, my grandma was very much into Methodism, and she was a pillar of the Methodist group in Winchmore Hill. And one of the things I remember about her was that there was a woman there who was really good at knitting tea cozies. And she used to come back frequently with different tea cozies, which I proceeded to put on my head. And they had little bunches of flowers on the top. My grandpa was not very spiritual. He had been badly affected in the First World War. He'd been gassed, and he was ill for the rest of his life as a result of that. On the other side, my dad's parents, well, dad's wasn't that spiritual, but I remember once going for a walk in the evening around our area in Birmingham, because we moved to Birmingham, and it was a clear night, and I looked up at the sky and I said, hey Dad, doesn't that make you think there must be some sort of God or something? And he sort of looked all embarrassed, because he was a rational scientist, thinks, you know. And he went, well, I suppose there might well be something behind it. And that was about the most spiritual statement I think I ever got out of it.
So where in Birmingham were you?
In Birmingham, we were quite near the university. We were at Selly Park. And it was walking distance to university, and I used to cycle to school, so you can see my school. Anyway, my early life was, we had rationing, both during the war, it was a food rationing book, and then after the war, fuel rationing. This was 49 to 50, but fuel rationing came in again at the time of the Suez crisis at the end of the 50s. So it was a different life that we had. I remember we had, Dad bought a TV, black and white TV, just before the coronation in 1953. And I went to the coronation, and the only thing I really remember about that was that the woman behind me, sitting in these sort of stalls, vomited. So, I do remember a few carts of people in going past. Okay, now this was the earliest, I think, knowledge I have of friends. This is the a Quaker meeting house, Friends Meeting House in Richmond Hill in London. It was again within walking distance of home, and it has at the back here, I've thought of including a photograph, it has a Quaker burial ground. It's very simple, very peaceful, very nice, right in the middle of suburban London. We moved to London backwards and forwards a bit. Dad, when I was born, Dad and Mum had jobs in Bletchley Park. Dad was involved in the code breaking thing there. And then after we'd been back in London for a time, when I was about 8 or 9, Dad moved to Birmingham to work for a firm called J&E Sturge, which was founded by John and Edmund Sturge, who were well-known Quakers involved with the anti-slavery movement. And this guy on the left is Edmund Sturge, and this is the factory that they founded. It wasn't quite on the scale of the other one down the road, which is Cadbury Bourneville. But in those days, in the 18th and 19th century, Quakers had an awful lot of influence on industry in Britain. Not only the chemical industry, which is this one, Albright and Wilson was another chemical firm. There was the whole Industrial Revolution. Coalbrookdale was a company in Ironbridge, and that was founded by Abram Darby III, who was another prominent Quaker businessman. And then there was Rowntree's and Cadbury's and Fry's, Clark's Shoes, Lloyd's Bank, were all Quaker firms. And it saddens me that there aren't many big Quaker firms like that left anymore. And I think that Quakers' influence has dwindled a bit as a result of that. The Cadburys were, of course, prominent in the founding of Woodbrook College too, which is on the main Bristol Road in Selly Oak. The Sturge factory, you can see, was on the canal, and that was the main canal between Worcester and Birmingham, joined up with the River Severn. And the reason that Birmingham was so prominent was because it was right in the centre. It was well connected with canals. They built the canals to connect Birmingham, and it had abundant supplies of some of the things that we regard as being very nasty, but in those days were essential to get the Industrial Revolution off the ground, such as supply of coal and iron ore and that sort of thing. This is the Cadbury site. Bourneville, the Bourneville Village Trust was founded by the Cadburys to house the employees of the Cadbury factory. So behind here is the actual factory. You can see where my mouse is going. That's the Cadbury factory, and this is some of the area, the social area of the factory, and here is the Bourneville Village Green. And then the whole Bourneville Village Trust were houses, very nice houses, gardens and so on and so forth, that were built for the workers in the Cadbury factory. And we lived within the smell of the chocolate factory. So when the wind was in a certain direction, this wafted across, and of course saliva started running. I'm not sure about the church at Bourneville. I've been to the meeting house, but I don't know about the church.
Yes, the church was built by the Cadburys, and it actually had quite a big organ in it.
I was aware of Quaker influences from quite a young age. When in Richmond Hill, and then on moving to Birmingham, and Dad being employed. I don't think he knew it was a Quaker firm when he got the job. but he soon found out.
Were they good employers?
They were pretty good. They were pretty good. Yes, as far as I know. I mean, I was a bit young to understand that. But at the end, like most of these Quaker organisations, they tended to get taken over. Sturge were taken over by the German firm Böhringer, which apparently has a little branch here. Okay, so at school, these are my couple of my schools here. On the left is Stanley House School, which is my prep school, and it was like primary school, but you know, paid for. The main thing I remember about spirituality there was that at lunchtime, because we had provided lunch, the second master used to get up and say Benedicas Benedicat, which was a Latin grace, but it was sort of toned and with no explanation before meal, and then there was a similar Latin phrase at the end, which was mumbo jumbo to us boys.
Raising Christum Dominatum.
Yes, exactly. That's right. That's right. And when I was 8 there, I started learning Latin and French, and I went through from that stage there right the way until I was 16 at this other school at the top right here, which was King Edward School, Birmingham, which was founded in 1552 by Edward VII, and it had pretensions to being one of the really posh schools. In fact, it does pretty well. It's usually pretty high up in the rankings in English schools. But at that time, and it still does, they have a big tradition of cadet forces, and you were either in the cadets or the scouts or what was joyously known as the remnants. As a Quaker, it is difficult for me to admit to having been in the cadet force, but I soon got out of the army section and got into the naval section, which was more fun, you know, messing about in boats and all that kind of stuff. And I almost crashed one of Her Majesty's minesweepers. They allowed me, when at camp, they allowed me to take the wheel of this thing. And I sort of drifted more and more towards the rocks until someone grabbed it on. This school was, this here was the main hall. It's called Big School, where we had assembly every day. And our principal, what are you doing?
Just your just watching.
Okay, yeah, don't worry. The principal, this guy here, had an unfortunate name for the principal of a all-boys school. His name was Reverend R.G. Lunt, MCMA. You can see that there's room for jest. He used to be. He was a canon of the cathedral. He was a son of a bishop, and he had pretensions to trying to make us boys all holy. But he did have a certain amount of hypocrisy. At least that's what it seemed to me. For example, one day I remember him saying we had a sort of sermon every day, and he said in the sermon, after the reading from the Bible, this lesson teaches you not to be standoffish. Just because you go to King Edward School, Birmingham, doesn't mean that you're one jot or tittle any better than anybody who goes to any other school. And then we sang a few hymns and prayers and that sort of thing. And then he got up, the school notices, face of thunder. It has come to my notice that certain of you have been seen consorting in public with secondary modern school girls. This will not do. So it was in the same assembly. And used to pontificate at the end of year gatherings. And 2 years after I left, some kids who were bright electronics whizzes, he had a throne called Sapientia, which means more wise. There was a carved wooden throne that he pontificated from, And these kids, you can see up the top there, that little white thing, they had rigged up an electronic radio control thingy. So they were sitting at the back, and every time he said, "You should be jolly proud to be members of this school," little flag wave. And of course, it brought their house down. They had a little bit of difficulty controlling the riot. Anyway, so yes, I wasn't exactly drawn to the Church of England at that stage. This is my mum and my sister, who probably wouldn't appreciate me showing a photo of her. She's now 64. Mum is a little bit older. She's buried here in Hanbury Churchyard. But this is mum had a sort of inklings towards the spiritual, but she never really let it out. She was drawn towards Quakers, but this picture is her having gone to a Catholic expo, and she came back and she was all, sort of slightly ungrounded, and there she is. I think it looks like the Madonna and Child, really. But that's my mum and my sister. And Hanbury Church is here because it was a centre for us. It was just not far from Bromsgrove, where we moved out to. But before we moved to Bromsgrove, Mum had found this church as a sort of, I don't know, a place of solace and spiritual regeneration. And my parents are now buried in the churchyard there.
The steeple's different brick to the rest of the building. Is it built later or something? Is it? Or?
Sorry.
See, the brick on the steeple is different from the brick of the body of the church.
I think it was. This site, like so many church sites in the UK, is on the top of the hill, and you can see out all across the Vale of Evesham, and you can see the Breeden Hill and Malvern Hills in the distance, and it's just quite near to the sort of Shakespeare country. And it's built on an area that was a Roman fort. And there's just over here, there is an old well, which was a sort of holy well in the old time, which of course they've now sealed in case kids get, fall down it and stuff. Get a bit impatient with some of these things, however. Okay. These are some of the influences on me in the 70s and 80s, I suppose the late 60s onwards. There was a campaign for nuclear disarmament. The sign now has been, I'll just try and move this. The sign here, the sign, it's actually the CND sign, which has been adopted as a peace sign, and it's made up of the semaphore signals for N and D, nuclear disarmament. So that's where that sign comes from. And I found that there was a Kiwi version of it. I can't remember who it was who made it, but that's been quite nice to me. JFK was quite an influence on people at that time. And certainly I was deeply affected by his assassination. I remember which pub I was in at the time. The limits to growth was the Club of Rome. This is very topical, of course, at the moment. This was the Club of Rome's writing about ecological and physical limits to continuing to grow, and they forecast really the situation that we're in now in the 70s. E.F. Schumacher, I met at a meeting he gave when I was in Oxford. He wrote this book, Small is Beautiful, which was a sort of Bible, I suppose, of some of the alternative groups in the 70s and 80s. And then, of course, getting on to the more spiritual side, let's move this thing again. I was influenced by Maharishi. I became a transcendental meditationist. I still can remember my mantra that I was soul. Of course, he had influence on the Beatles and people like that. And then at that time, I got involved with Quakers, and that's when I joined the Quakers in the UK. I couldn't find my original copy of Quaker Faith and Practice, which wasn't red, it was blue. And I couldn't find a photo of a blue one online, so I had to make.
Was it just by chance that you came upon Quakers?
No, because I mean I've known about them, and I think I came upon them because I was searching, and near to where I was living again, I forget, I think it was in Macclesfield. There was a Quaker meeting, so I thought I'd pop along and see what's happening. So I suppose partly by chance.
So was this before you went to Oxford or after?
This was after I went. I mean, my searching started when I was at Imperial College, and then I moved on to Oxford. Let's go on to that. These are the unis I went to. I went to Imperial College in London, which is basically a science and technology place, and they're now currently very big with the COVID stuff. Not only in the epidemiology, but also in the development of vaccines and things. And then after I'd done my first degree there, I got involved with a thing called Touchstone there, which was a spiritual refreshment group that met at weekends, went out to Virginia Water or somewhere where the college had a sort of retreat pad. But of course, at this stage, I was a scientist. And none of this, all this rubbish, all this spiritual rubbish. No time for it. I mean, Dad didn't have any time for it, so yeah. And so then I moved from Imperial College to Wadham College, Oxford, where the environment is somewhat different in the centre of London. And one's aware of the fact that many of the foundations were originally religious foundations. So I spent some time there. I was looking at the Oxford University coat of arms, and the motto Dominus Illuminatio Mea, which means God illuminate me, or I suppose in Quaker terms, God hold me in the light, or in Cockney terms, God strike a light. But anyway, from Wadham, I went back to London to University College, and there I was intrigued by Jeremy Bentham, who was one of the philosophers of the Enlightenment. He wasn't Christian by any means or religious by any means, but he decided that he wanted his body to be preserved on show for people, that they might learn from his life and mistakes. And so this guy is sitting there in one of the main hallways of University College London, and you go and see him. I mean, even Stalin and Lenin are hidden away in Moscow.
So I actually did go past Lenin's tomb in 1970, when the public were able to go past it.
Could you see him?
Yes.
Oh,
He was wearing a dinner jacket. I think it was all rather weird. And I paused for a second, and a guard came out of the shadows and urged me on. But I think that's no longer. I mean, he's been buried, I think, now.
yeah. Well, they changed a bit, didn't they? I forgot to mention when I was back on that previous slide. Other things that were going on, of course, was the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, And the other thing that happened was, anybody remember about the green goddesses? The green goddesses were not pagan routes of enlightenment. They were army fire engines that were used to during the farming strike. But I thought, you know, green goddesses was probably appropriate to bring them in. Talking about my spiritual journey. After I'd been to, come on, move on. After University College, I then did a postdoctoral fellowship at Birmingham, and then I ran out of sources of easy money as a student, and you know, hang on. I had socialist friends. In fact, when I was at Imperial College, one of my best friends rejoiced in the name of David Lenin Key because his father was a communist. I don't know whether they christened people, but that was his name. I was inspired by some of the ideas of communism, and I was also, I had a copy, I still got a copy of The Thoughts of Chairman Mao. Son Paul, before he went off to get involved in international politics and stuff, read my little copy of this and then gave me a very detailed critique of it before he disappeared to Washington. Incidentally, when I was at Imperial College, I applied for a summer work overseas thing, and I applied to a institute in Russia to do a summer job. And I was told by this guy, I went for a job interview with a guy from De La Rue Bull, who make security banknotes and things for the governments, you know, not just British government. And this guy, who was Colonel someone or other, who literally had a monocle in his eye, said, "My God, Winter, what are you going to do for your summer break?" And I said, "Well, I'm applying for a job in Russia." And I said, "I've almost got the job." His monocle literally dropped out of his head. "My God, Winter, don't you consider doing that? No reputable company in this country would dream of employing you. Been consulting with the commies." So, and when I went for the interview at the embassy, they said, where are you studying? "Where are you studying, Mr. Winter?" And I said, "Imperial College." "Ah, Imperialist College." Anyway, so these two guys, Lenin and Mao, I was a bit of fleeting acquaintance with. I used to go to Collett's bookshop in London, which was a left-wing bookshop. But also Desiderata, I came across. That was on the wall in our bathroom. Go classically amid the noise and hate, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible, without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. And that spoke to me, as had the, I said to the man at the gate of the year. So, you know, there are one or two texts that are pretty significant for me. Then I went and got a proper job, and I worked for ICI Pharmaceuticals, which then turned into AstraZeneca, which you've all heard about, no doubt. But when I was in ICI, I was questioning, and I went on a management course called Effective Management in the Complex World, which is based on a combination of re-evaluation counseling, which was invented by Harvey Jackins, and open systems theory. And it blew my mind because it showed me that we each have a core process, which is basically how one operates when one is operating to the highest and to the best, with most grace and flow, and so on and so forth. And it can be encapsulated in two words: a participle, in word, and a noun. And mine is balancing flow, because when things are in balance, they flow, and if they don't flow, they're out of balance, and so on and so forth. And that to me has been my touchstone that I come back to when life has gone off track. So that is a spiritual, I regard, spiritual thing, a connection, a way in which I can connect with the highest at any time that I feel off track. And it's brilliant, and I love it. And I'm having people asking me to do it with them, so that's great. The other thing that happened, so I'll talk about core process a bit later on probably. The other thing that happened is that one of my colleagues at ICI started waffling on about housing. Well, I said, no, this is all BS, you know. I mean, I'm a scientist, you're a scientist, you can agree with this stuff. He said, well, come around to our place at the weekend and I'll show you. And I'll show you can do it. And I went around and it could. And I just, that's another thing that blew my mind. So things had, yeah, my life had been rattled up a bit. And I started getting interested in new agey stuff, psychic phenomena, UFOs, Earth mysteries. I used to go to the festival of Mind, Body and Spirit in Olympia. Went there several times. I found out about Findhorn there. I found out about Gurdjieff, etc., etc., etc. There was a Quaker stand on there. It was really mind-boggling, some of the things that were there.
So Michael, were you able to dowse?
Yeah.
Did you find you could do that?
Yeah. And I doubt when after Mum had died, and we needed to put the stone on. It's a very long story, but eventually the guy who was making the stone, it took months to do it, said, I've actually got it nearly ready. He said, it'll be ready next week. Well, he'd been saying that for 6 months. But he said, if you go and indicate where your mum's buried, I'll go and put the stone on. So I said, okay, well, I went up there to the churchyard, and by that time, what had happened was that the vicar there had retired or died or something, and so had the sexton, and he hadn't kept a track, hadn't kept a map of where everybody was. So I thought, oh, what am I going to do? So I sat down, I smoked a lot of those times, I sat down, got my cigarettes out, and thought, come on, tell me what to do. And douse for it. So I got my dowsing rods out and I used 3 different methods, and they all agreed to within 2 inches. So I put my stake in the ground, and I think it's the right place, because it felt like the right place. And they're both in there now, so yeah. So dowsing seems to work for me on a good day.
Do you still use it?
Yeah, sometimes. I don't do dowsing to find out whether things are going to kill me, food.
No.
I mean, I'll take a chance, enjoy the food.
So dowsing works for more than just finding water, does it?
Oh yeah, you can use it for all sorts of things. Oil, you can use it for finding missing people.
Metals.
Metal, yeah. But you have to be. It can also be wishful thinking. It can be overruled by your desiring something. You have to. It's like this identification. You've got to stand aside from it and allow it to come through you.
Because I held the rods and nothing happened, and my grandfather held my hands and everything happened.
Yeah, I can do that with people. People say I can't dowse, so I say, okay, we'll take the rods and I'll touch them. And then I say, can I do it myself? You can do it now, show you. And they can usually do it. Not, but within half an hour. Anyway, this is a lousy photo on the left of Mum and Dad's grave. My sister sent it to me, and it was a poor resolution photo. I should have found a lot, but didn't. Dad was. Mum died of breast cancer, secondaries, and then shortly after that, Dad on the rebound got into a relationship with someone who was going to marry, and was going to have they went off to Madeira to look for orchids, because Dad got really into photographing orchids in the wild, rare orchids in the wild. And he only had two more European orchids to find, and he'd have photographed all of them in their native habitat. And so these two, he and she, went off to Madeira to have a pre-marriage honeymoon, and they went off to look for one of these two orchids. And Dad had a whole load of allergies and wouldn't go anywhere without his antihistamines. But this particular day, they went off with the Portuguese guide looking for this orchid, and Dad forgot his antihistamine, so he stayed in the four-wheel drive. And Patty, this woman he was with, went off with the guide, and within seconds they found this orchid. And she yelled out, "Roy, I found it!" And he leapt out of the car with his map in his hand and his camera around his neck, and running over there, kicked into a wasp nest, and they all flew up and panicked and ran over a cliff. And so if you need to know, if you're in that sort of situation in a Portuguese-speaking country, you need to know the phrase "orlo de chumbo," which is lead lined coffin, to get the remains back. Yeah, so that was those two deaths within 18 months of each other, as well as all the sort of spiritual searchings, sort of, yeah, it's like crashing into a buffalo scene of your big train. Okay, I moved to Wales with this. There's not much more going, not much more. I'll soon go. With a woman that I'd met, and it was a disastrous relationship. But it's carrying on. I was carrying on searching. Alice Bailey. The Alice Bailey books were important to me, despite the fact that they were almost indigestible. They're very difficult to read. Gurdjieff, the old rogue, he wrote the book Meetings with Remarkable Men that were made into that film. He was also Kathleen Mansfield, I think, was one of Gurdjieff's people. And one of the other books that I think was really interesting was this thing called The Gospel of the Essenes, which has got really interesting balance. It has the Lord's Prayer, prayer to the Holy Father, but it also has a parallel prayer to the Holy Mother. So there's this sort of balancing thing, and then there's the Ten Commandments are balanced by the sort of aspirations that for those who are in the know, sort of thing, spiritually aware people. Interesting stuff. And then I got involved to a certain extent with this guy at the bottom, who I mentioned in my talk earlier on, in my ministry. This guy here is Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, and I was a Rajneeshi for a short time. I had a robe, very much the same colour as what you're wearing there, bright orange robe, and because I never take these things particularly seriously, or a lot of my friends had Sanskrit names that the Rajneeshi organisation had given them. My name was Swami Deva Eccles, after the famous Eccles, in the Goon Show. Because I can really take this stuff really seriously. A couple of other books. I'm very interested in the Gnostics, the Nag Hammadi library I've got a copy of, and the Gnostic Gospels by Elaine Pagels, and I still don't understand why some of these more esoteric Gospels are not accepted by the conventional churches, because they have some really, good stuff in. And sorry, I'll move on. And then about this time, in Wales, I bumped into a guy called David Hoffman, who was a herbalist. He's a very famous herbalist, written textbooks on the stuff. And his friends, and they were into of this thing called Psychosynthesis, which I absolutely love. And it is a model and a therapy or approach, psychological approach, which is based on this egg diagram as a model of the human psyche, including the superconscious and the connection to the spiritual, and the lower unconscious and the higher unconscious, and the individual self there. And you also work with the will in a really interesting way, because you're not just talking about the forcing Victorian will, which is the one that my dad was really good at, you know. Get rid of yourself, you know, that sort of stuff. But it talks about the good will and the skillful will, as well as the strong will. And it also talks about sub-personalities, which are those little bits of us that take over. And I think, I'm going to write something about this, I think that sub-personalities are the Assagioli's approach to looking at angels and demons in the old traditions. So I'm sort of looking at that language. Then I went on to the Findhorn Foundation. Now this is a spiritual awakening thing. I was getting very frustrated because my relationship with this woman in Wales had broken down. We had big punch-ups. She reckoned that half the cash that I'd inherited belonged to her, because we'd been together for about 6 months. And she was going to sue me, and there was all this sort of stuff. And I was unemployed. Was back in a little place in Birmingham, little terraced house. And I didn't know what to do. I was involved a little bit with counselling. I was doing counselling work as a voluntary counsellor, but I was also receiving it. And one day I just got to the end of it and I thought, well, what am I supposed to be doing? So I got my symbols of divinity. I got the cross, I got the Buddha, I got Shiva, and I lined them up on my mantelpiece one day. And I've been doing Gestalt therapy, so that was good, and writing and stuff. And I got a pile of cushions out, and I really went for it. God, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? And I went and bashed these cushions, and I wanted the answer, you know. And I really went for it, and I exhausted myself, and I was absolutely knackered. I don't know what the next door neighbours thought, because I was screaming at the top of my voice. And this awareness came to me, go and live at Findhorn. And I said, you're nuts. You're absolutely nuts. I'm a scientist. They talk to bloody cabbages, you know. I can't go to a place like that. And they believe in nature spirits and all that stuff. And I said, right, look, I'll strike a deal with you. I'll come back in a week's time, and if the answer's the same, I will explore going to Findhorn. So in a week's time, I sat down in meditation. I said, right, okay, I'm back here now. Spirit, what's the answer? Should I go to Findhorn, or was this a mistake? Should I carry on? Go to Findhorn. I said, okay, well, I promised I would follow up, and I'll do that. So I rang up Findhorn, and I said, have you got a place on your experience week, which is the first week that they have for new people? And they said, oh no, this was June. They said, oh no, we're fully booked until October. We can fit you in then. And then I heard in the background this woman saying, we just had a cancellation for 2 weeks' time. I still can't believe this. And so I was there in 2 weeks' time. And as I walked in the door, I knew that there was the next place I was going to live. So I became a member of the Findhorn Foundation. I happened to be working in the dining room in this building here, which is the Clooney Hill, used to be the Clooney Hill Hotel, and nearby hangs a tail. There's the dining room we worked in, and I was the focalizer, which means the person who holds the energy for the place. For the dining room. And we had these guests come through, one of whom was a Kiwi girl who'd fallen off a horse, needed a shoulder massage. So that's why I'm here. I'm a souvenir of the ROE. And I'm still here. We also had a guy who was, you know, some of these folk in the new agey sort of thing tended to be a bit floaty, you know, they're spiritual up here, ungrounded. And we were going around, you know, what jobs do you feel you want to do when you feel spirit is up? And he said, I think I will go and hover in the dining room. He meant Hoover. You could just see. Anyway, this place here on the left, the caravan is the original caravan that the caddies lived in. It's still there. When they started the foundation, Findhorn Foundation, on the caravan park, eventually the foundation bought the old hotel that the caddies had been running when it came up for sale. And they also had jurisdiction or, I don't know, guardianship of the island of Earaid for 11 months of the year. It's owned by a Dutch family, and they gave Findhorn stewardship over it. So we lived in these granite cottages during the winter. And this is the island that Robert Louis Stevenson writes about in Kidnapped. And Stevenson's uncle was a lighthouse engineer. So these are the lighthouse cottages there. And they're granite, and in the winter they are freezing. But we lived there, Joe and I lived there, and she was getting itchy feet. She said, I think I'll go back to New Zealand, and I'll stop off in Japan. And I thought, this one's too good to lose, you know. So I proposed to her sort of, and we decided we'd get married. And there was no Quaker meeting there. Nobody in Findhorn was licensed to do marriages. So we went to the Iona, the abbey at Iona, which is a community, a spiritual community itself. And the guy, the minister there who ran it, said he had to get permission from the moderator. And the moderator gave his permission. And we were allowed to get married in the Michael Chapel, probably enough. At the back, you can't actually see it from here. This is a better photo than one you can see the Michael Chapel from, which is about 12th century. And then we moved to London. We got involved with Neil's Yard Apothecary, who made herbal stuff, and I was formulating stuff for them. And we carried on exploring spiritual things. This is Sufi dancing. We went to various Sufi dancing things to observe rather more than to take part. But we did do sacred dance in Findhorn and you know, silent.
Are they like the Whirling Dervishes, are they?
These are the Whirling Dervishes. Yes. Yeah, there's 2 or 3 groups in London. And then while we were in London, we explored around the place. We went to Glastonbury, which is a well-known sacred site going back way pre-Christian times. This is the Glastonbury Tor, which has a tower on the top. It's an old sacred site, and traditionally people used to pilgrimage, trundle anyway, up these, you know, spiral pathways until they got to the top, chanting things all along the way. And at the bottom here, there's a place called Chalice Well. This is an old holy well, which we knew the people who looked up. Said that Joseph of Arimathea went to Glastonbury, and Glastonbury, I think it's a Glastonbury rose or something, which is supposed to be associated with him. We also went to Cornwall, and there's a lot of stone circles. There's all sorts of myths and traditions associated with these. We found it very odd. When we used to go to these places in Cornwall, usually it was misty, and usually we came across a woman dressed in black, different woman in each place, but dressed, you know, like the archetypal witch type character, and it was very strange, very humbling, really. We coming to New Zealand, coming to Aotearoa. We went through India and Nepal and so on. And one of the places that we went to was Pushkar, which is in Rajasthan. And it immediately struck me going for a walk out of the town. Here's the town. There's a hill here with a temple on the top, and there's a holy well in here, very well known holy well. And it seems to me that the geography is really similar. Here's Glastonbury. There's the township, and the well here, Chalice Well, is about there. It just seems to me that somebody, maybe dowsing would help us to. Well, we were in India. We went to a meeting or audience with HHDL, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and we were on our way to New Zealand. And one of the things that we were going to do when we got here, of course, was to meet Joe's parents. And these guys, the guys that were with the Dalai Lama, who were doing the chanting, all I could hear them chanting was mother-in-law, mother-in-law, mother-in-law. So Dalai Lama to me is a really special person. We went there where we spent some time in Dharamsala, which is the place where he lives in India when he's not touring the world. And I've been to events with the Dalai Lama in Aotearoa, about 3 different events. Most of the time he's been here, and always been inspired. What he did. A friend of mine said she went to one of his things in London, and she couldn't quite understand because he said he said you must always watch your bowels, and in fact he said you must always you always remember your bowels, and he actually said you must always remember your vowels. But and finally, back in Aotearoa, I've told you the thing about the core process thing. I've hinted at the fact that I've been involved with counselling and psychosynthesis. I'm actually in the process of doing a psychosynthesis and coaching course from San Francisco at the moment, and I'm involved with the New Zealand Psychosynthesis Trust. Joe and I decided that we would take a course in coaching at SIT, and that is becoming increasingly important again for me. So I'm going to start offering coaching again. But this is us on one of the SIT residential courses down in Chicago. That's Joe. This is an old row here, almost out of the picture, almost literally. And that's about it. So this is where I see my future, such as it is, apart from the Grim Reaper standing in there. So I want to carry on being involved with Quakers, but also not closing my mind to other streams. I mean, I think that it's like a rainbow or a jewel. There's different facets, different ways to spirit and to know. I wouldn't regard myself as a Christian by any stretch of imagination. Pagan Quaker, probably. So in the future, I can see core process, coaching, psychosynthesis, Quakers, and linking through my personal self in the middle of the egg to my transpersonal and to the universal Great Spirit or God. And that's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if there's any questions or comments, I'll be happy to respond. I've kept you here for too long.
Was that lady, some of those women that you saw, were they Druids in the black?
I don't know. I think, there were Druidic people around, but I think that they were wise women,
Yeah.
you know, people who were involved in witchcraft and herbalism and all kinds of stuff. But we didn't really talk to them very much. You know, it was sort of fleeting.
Right.
So, but they were interesting. Some of them they had little spells in the trees, little written spells that were asking for healing and so on. So
It resonates a little bit with the Black Madonna.
yes,
And
yeah.
Separate